Nick, you can settle in while I heap some praise on you for a couple minutes here. Nick is one of the most prominent investors and entrepreneurs in the Northwest. He was the first person outside of the Bezos family to invest in Amazon back in '95. He founded Aquantive, served as chairman of the company until the sale to Microsoft in 2007 for $6.4 billion, the largest acquisition Microsoft had ever made at the time. He's invested in many of Seattle's most successful startups beyond that as well. More recently, Nick has turned his attention to social and public policy issues. He's the author of 2 political bestsellers, Gardens of Democracy and The True Patriot. Even if you only have a passing interest in politics and policy, I highly recommend both books. He co-founded the True Patriot Network, which is a nonpartisan group committed to furthering patriotic ideals. Also co-founded the Washington State League of Education Voters, also a nonpartisan organization that's focused on promoting public education. He's also co-president of that organization. Nick's theories on middle-out economics, which we're going to talk about more today, have directly influenced President Obama's economic proposals, and they've also made Nick a sought-after advisor to 2016 presidential hopefuls. So thank you, Nick, for joining us.
Yeah, happy to do it. Thank you.
So why don't we start on the business side of things?
Sure.
As I said, you've invested in dozens of successful companies, and I think the string with those investments is that you often see an opportunity long before a market has developed. With Amazon, you literally bought into the future of commerce, writing it a $45,000 check to Jeff Bezos. And if I'm not mistaken, you also convinced him to start Amazon in Seattle.
Well, I didn't convince him.
You played a role.
I played a role.
Yes, I don't want to overstate it.
Yeah, yeah.
So while an investment in Amazon now seems like
obvious,
such an obvious thing, in '95, not so much.
No, for sure.
So take us back to that time, what you saw, and you know, the belief that you had in what that company could accomplish.
Well, I think that. Well, first, thanks for having me here. It's nice to get to chat with all of you. And you know, I grew up in a traditional business. My family business still manufactures bed, pillows, and down comforters, which is the world's hardest business. You know, all businesses are not the same. Some businesses are easy and some businesses are hard, and there are a bunch of independent dynamics that affect that. But selling commodity polyester pillows to Walmart, that's a hard business. And so I grew up, you know, as they said in that fun movie, in a land war in Asia. You know, it was very difficult. It continues to be very difficult. And so I ran sales, marketing, and merchandising for the family business and became deeply attuned to the things that you needed to do in a highly competitive environment to beat your competitors, which is a lot different than just coming up with some new whiz-bang thing that people like, which is what we do in the technology business. When you're going head-to-head, you know, in a commodity business with a bunch of other well-entrenched players, you have to, you know, it's like single hull sailing. You got to be better. You can't just be in the right place at the right time. And so I developed essentially a set of ideas about how you beat competitors that I think, you know, has always served me well. And it really does come down to finding a differentiated way to build, you know, an outsized amount of value for the people that you are trying to sell to. And value, to me, is a ratio. It's 2 ratios. It's the ratio of the benefits of your product divided by the costs, and then compared to the customer's alternatives. And so, you know, if you can create a lot of value on a relative basis, you know, you've got a lot of opportunity. And if you can't, it's a tough sled. And so when the internet came along, few people in the country could do the sort of strategic arithmetic the way I could, because my family business, which is the pillow business, sold to every kind of retailer in America. We sold to department stores, mass merchandisers, discount stores, catalog operations, wholesale clubs, grocery stores. And because the way I looked at it was essentially how we could create value for each one of those channels, when the internet came along, I could do strategic arithmetic on what the channel dynamics of the internet were going to be relative to all the other channels. And it became incredibly obvious that, I mean, if you just sort of did the math and imagined that the internet at that time, which was very, very primitive, would get better, and software at the time, which was very, very primitive, would get better, that you were going to end up with a channel of distribution that was just going to kick the crap out of department stores and all these other things. And so for me, it was quite an easy bet. And so I was lucky in two dimensions. The first dimension was three. I had that perspective. Two, I knew a guy who shared that perspective. His name was Jeff Bezos. But I always love to tell this one story because it clarifies for people how much luck plays a role in these things. So I was incredibly lucky to have a family business that taught me these things, lucky to have a dad who was supportive and let me explore my ideas, lucky to have friends like Jeff Bezos, lucky that he would be open to sending his stuff to my house from New York and starting the business here. But I had two friends at that very moment who wanted to start in 94, 95, who wanted to start internet retailing companies. One was an unbelievably capable guy named Jeff Bezos, and the other was an unbelievably capable guy named Jeff Tauber. Jeff Tauber was the divisional merchandise manager at Bloomingdale's at the time. And Bloomingdale's is less a force today than it was, but in 1995, Bloomingdale's was the preeminent retailer in America. And Jeff is a serious dude. And Bezos decided to start a bookstore, and Tauber decided to start an internet department store. And I offered both of them simultaneously my money. Jeff Bezos said yes first. Amazon went on to be an enormous success. Cybershop you've never heard of, right? You heard nothing about it because the bet was books. The bet was not department stores. But it looked the same to me at the time, which just goes to show you that it's easy to look back and think, oh, you were so smart. But really, a lot of success that you see in the world is survivorship bias. Like, somebody has to be successful, right? Somebody will flip heads 10 times in a row. That doesn't mean you were better at flipping coins than anybody else. It just means that you were the one that actually flipped the coins. And so, I think I can say, and I think you would agree, I'm a capable person, right? Yep. Yes? Yep. But it does take great luck. And then, of course, you get to parlay that good luck, that early look at what the internet is all about, into other possibilities that, of course, no one else on earth is seeing, internet advertising being one of them. You make a couple of good hires and the rest is history, right? I mean, it took a lot of work, but, we were lucky. Anyway. But I do, you said, what does it take to make good investments? And I think, my own view is, looking for businesses that create what I call transformational amounts of value for their customers. That is to say, 10 times as much value as the competing alternatives. It lasts 10 times as long. It goes 10 times as fast. It has 10 times the selection. Ideally it's 100 times. 10 times the selection and 1/10 the cost, right? And certainly Amazon.com was a great example of that, right? We opened the bookstore. We had literally 10 times the selection of any bookstore on earth on the day that we opened. And you know, for most people, we had 100 times the selection that was available to them, right? In some small town with one small bookstore. We sold for about 40% less than list. And you didn't have to get off your butt to do it, right? Like, so no travel time, no time to do it, no parking expense, you know, boom, off you went. So,
are you surprised at all that Amazon has become what they are today? Certainly nobody could have predicted the size and the success, but
well, we predicted the size, like in our fantasies, right? My bet was that internet retailing would completely eclipse every other form of retailing. That was my bet. So that, about that, I'm not surprised. You know, Jeff Bezos is a pathologically driven person and just ridiculously talented. So it's not, I mean, it's fortunate but not amazing that Amazon has been so successful, right? Yeah. Brilliant, incredibly driven CEO, first mover, great board, unlimited capital, you know, like, you know, but AWS, who would have ever thought, right? You know, movies, no. Like, there's a whole bunch of things that happen to Amazon that, of course, we would never have guessed about. You know, AWS being, of course, one that wasn't even, you know, an imagined possibility when we started the company.
Yeah, that's all about building a company that is prepared to take advantage of an opportunity when it comes along.
Exactly, which they did, right.
Yeah. Well, you know, clearly I think indeed you are quite capable and certainly no more than in you know, the vision and the strategy that you're able to apply to business. I think another really admirable trait that you have is the conviction with which you pursue ideas. Mm-hmm. And, you know, for me, that was most clear back after the dot-com bubble burst. And Quantive at the time was trading for, you know, $1 to $2 a share.
Wish I had bought some.
And you bought some.
I didn't buy some. My stupid attorney told me I couldn't. No, insider trading.
You
asshole.
You had plenty.
Yeah,
right?
I did.
You had plenty.
He's one of my best friends.
I'm
to
not
be clear about
it.
Yeah.
But so we were trading $1 to $2, mm-hmm. and WPP came knocking. Yeah. And offered, if memory serves, somewhere around 3x what we were trading for. Yeah. And half the board said, let's just sell.
Yeah, I know.
And you said, no, there's no damn way.
Yeah, no way.
And this was a time when most companies like ours were begging to get purchased for any price. Yeah. So what gave you the conviction and the patience that you had at that time?
Yeah. Well, okay. I think that's a terrific question. And sort of under the same heading of, you know, I think that you have to look at decisions like that with a certain amount of humility, in the same way that you have to look at success with a certain amount of humility. There are two elements to it. You know, the first is a very clear-eyed view of the value that the enterprise is creating and can create in the future, and your confidence that that will break through the exogeneity of this meltdown, right? Like, we weren't as cool as they told us we were going into the bubble, and we weren't as crappy as they told us we were in it, right? Or as it crashed, right? And so having a very clear-eyed view about what the value was, what we were creating, and how big the market size was, and what the future looked like, I think is very important. But there's another element, I think, at play, which, you know, is something that I believe typifies very good entrepreneurs, which is a psychological trait. So being a good entrepreneur requires some practical skills, but it also requires, you know, a certain kind of psychological profile. And there can be no doubt that I fit squarely in the well, what Jeff Bezos calls a high-functioning contrarian. That's what he called me, as a high-functioning contrarian. And the thing about people is that we have been evolutionarily designed to be sociable and cooperative, which is how societies function. And so people in general very much like to get along with other people. And, it's not, when you go to the Seahawks game and everybody's cheering, this is this thing expressing itself. And the thing is that some of us didn't get that gene, right? Some of us didn't get the, hey, if everybody's going in one direction, we should go too. I didn't get that gene. I got this gene which was, y'all are going over there. I'm not very comfortable with that. I'm going to go over here. And I've had that gene since I was a wee boy. I mean, I came out like that to the chagrin of my parents, my teachers, everyone who has ever tried to govern my activity. Because I don't need, I like it when people think I'm awesome, but I'm quite comfortable when people think I'm not awesome. And lots of people hate it when other people don't think they're awesome. They hate conflict, they hate criticism, they hate going against the flow. And I never had, I'm actually quite uncomfortable in crowds, at sporting events. Organized religion makes my skin crawl. Anything that involves, yay, we're all going to do this. I'm like, no, let's not do that. Let's do something else, right? I don't think that's learned behavior. It's just like me. And so
I got to interrupt. The interesting part of the example you give is Nick's brother is a part owner and general manager of the Seattle Sounders.
Yeah.
So your aversion to crowds and sporting events.
Yeah, no. And I go to the Sounders because I'm really supportive of my little brother, and it's awesome how good they're doing, and I get very excited at those games. But if you didn't run it, I wouldn't go. I wouldn't. It's just not my program. I don't watch sports on TV. I don't watch any TV. So all these TV programs that everybody's always talking about, they're all I'm not on that bus. I'm over on some weird other bus, which is the bus that whatever makes me happy and tends to be weird, obscure things. But the fact that, so for a lot of people, the fact that everybody's saying the world's going to end is deeply influential to them. They're like, oh my God, maybe the world's going to end. And I'm like, fuck you. The world is not going to end. It's not. I just don't need to go there. And so that's so handy in these moments of panic. And, where just because everybody, even other smart people, are like, you're just not, yeah. You're just like, well, I don't care what you think. I'm going to make my own kind of judgment about what the future holds. And I will tell you, here's one of the most interesting things I've learned about people and, venture capitalists is that, fancy venture capitalists who went to Harvard or Stanford are no more likely to be independent thinkers than bus drivers, right? IQ and education does not correlate with the ability to think independently, right? Those people are sheep, just like everybody else, right? And so, you can have a whole bunch of people, really smart people, who all talk themselves into the same thing, and they wear the same clothes, and they go in the same direction, and that, just because they wear really nice suits and went to fancy schools doesn't mean they're right. It just is how people are. So anyway, I think that, I sometimes give a presentation about entrepreneurship entitled "It'll Never Fly, Orville," which is what they told the Wright brothers, right? They said, "It'll never fly, Orville." Well, if those guys had listened, of course we wouldn't have airplanes, right? But they said, screw you, we're going to make her fly. And that's what it takes. And that's what it takes at that moment, I think, is that kind of, I'm not even sure if it's courage. It's just no, I actually don't care what you think. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's just being that far away from being, insane and a sociopath. I'm not, I say that glibly, but if you draw the I don't know what you call it, the fourth, the 4 boxes, whatever that is. So you've got high functioning and low functioning, and you've got conformist and what was that? Nonconformist, or what did Bezos call me? Contrarian, right? And high functioning conformists, these people run banks, right? And low functioning conformists, these people work, I don't know, they work in a bank or whatever it is. And high functioning contrarians, people like me, but low functioning contrarians, those people are in prison, right? So there's a, there's a very fine line between that, and the thing is that, and I'm talking about it because it's important to me, and I think about it a lot. There's a fine line between being an independent thinker and being a sociopath who doesn't care about other people, right? There's a difference between those two things. And if you think about politics and policy and culture as much as I do, and in the way that I do, like the distinction between those two things is very, very important, because there's a difference between having the independence of mind to do something that other people aren't like agreeing with, and doing things that are terrible for other people, right? Just because you don't care about them. And you've talked yourself into not caring about them and thinking that it doesn't matter. Yeah. So anyway.
Well, you bring up social issues and public policy. Mm-hmm. For all of your success in business, for all the people that you've employed, you bristle at being called a job creator.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, okay, so I've been writing about and thinking about politics and culture for a long time, and we live in an age, governed by, a certain set of ideas. I call those ideas explanations, right? The societies are shaped by the explanations we use to describe how the world works around us. And the easiest example I can think of is that if you explain the solar system by putting the Earth at the center of it, as we did for 99% of human history, and you wanted to send a rocket from Earth to Mars, you would send it in a particular direction. If you explain the solar system with the sun in the center of it, as it is, you would send the rocket in a completely different direction. And while people are entitled to their opinions, only one of those explanations will actually get a rocket from Earth to Mars. The other one, oblivion. Navigating society or an economy in particular is exactly the same. If you explain how it works incorrectly, you will point your policies into oblivion. And if you explain it correctly, you can have a pretty good result. You can take yourself where you want to go. And so the really interesting thing about this moment is that all orthodox economic theory, what most of you learned from your economics professors in college, is in turn based on a bunch of assumptions about how these systems work that is entirely incorrect. It's totally wrong. By wrong, I don't mean you say potato, I say potato way, right? I mean completely wrong. Wrong in the same way as if you imagined that the Earth was the center of the solar system. Because all of these ideas rest in turn on the idea that these systems, an economy for instance, is a closed system. That's a technical term, right? It's a mechanistic, closed, linear system. All orthodox economics, all the microeconomics you learned, it depends on the idea that if one thing goes up, another thing goes down. Depends on the idea that the system is efficient. Depends on the idea that it's welfare maximizing. And all of this is just utter nonsense, because the system isn't like that. The system is open, complex, adaptive, and ecosystemic. It's a system characterized by increasing returns, not decreasing returns, right? The feedback loops in a closed system are negative, like a car engine, where if it goes, the gas is gone. In an open system, the systems are increasing returns, like a hurricane or tornado. They build on one another. And so if you understand, so the thing is that all this is relative news, right? This way of understanding systems is only about 30 or 40 years old, 50 years old now. 70s, 80s, complexity theory, chaos theory, all this stuff, which comes out of the Santa Fe Institute and Oxford University and all these places. And so there's this giant shift happening, sort of like you could call it a second enlightenment, where we get to completely reimagine how human social systems actually work. And if you look at it in the modern way, it becomes incredibly obvious that an economy actually is an ecosystem. It's a kind of an ecosystem, and it's characterized by the same kinds of circle of life feedback loops. And so prosperity is a consequence of a feedback loop between customers and businesses, right? And only consumers can set that in motion. That's why the fundamental law of capitalism has nothing to do with supply and demand and pricing. And if customers don't have any money, businesses don't have any customers, right? That's it. That's it. And so, you know, and why does this matter? Because if you imagine that I'm a job creator, or the business that you work for is a job creator, then you can imagine that if you pour, for instance, money into a rich guy like me, like an ingredient, jobs will pop out of us sort of like donuts or something like that. And indeed, our economic policies reflect that idea. That, you know, this theory was advanced by economists and then grabbed by the right, broadly accepted by the left, but there's this idea that is deep in our culture and our economics that says that, if taxes go lower on rich people, that will be good for everybody, right? This idea, and that if the more profit a business makes, that somehow will be good for everybody. But the share of income for people in the top 1% has gone from 8 to 24% over the last 30 years, while our effective tax rates have fallen by 50%. If it was true, any of this stuff, then we would be drowning in jobs, right? Corporate profits have doubled over the last 30, 40, 50 years. They are up from 6% of GDP to 12.6% of GDP. They've gone from 8 to 12.6 since 1980, 30 years. That's an extra $1 trillion, by the way. If it was true that profitable corporations created jobs, we'd be drowning in them today. The truth is that these things are completely uncorrelated, that jobs are a consequence of a healthy, balanced feedback loop between the amount of money you make and the amount of money I make. If you don't have any money, I will have no customers. It's not very much more complicated than that. And so when you see it that way, it has a radical effect on how you would implement policy to make a capitalist system highly functioning and work. And so, among other things, I'm leading the charge on this $15 minimum wage thing happening in Seattle. I keynoted the symposium yesterday, and the orthodox view is that raising the minimum wage to $15 is bad for capitalism. It's exactly wrong. Raising the minimum wage is a tool shrewd capitalists use to make capitalism work, right? Because the minimum wage on a relative basis has been falling like a rock. It would be if it had tracked productivity, it'd be $22 today. So, and if the minimum wage was $22, we would have no unemployment, because everybody would be making enough money to sustain the virtuous cycle of prosperity that capitalism can be. And indeed, in places like Australia, where the minimum wage is $17, they have half the unemployment that we do. And of course, it's not just that they don't have high levels of unemployment. It's also that the lived experience of the typical family is much, much better there now than it is here. Free healthcare, free university, everybody has a house, everybody gets 6 weeks of vacation, right? So all of this is, I'm older than most of you, but y'all are headed for a world of hurt unless this thing gets a lot better. Here's the fact that very few people know, is that the share of income for the top 1% has gone from 8 to 24 over the last 30 years. But if you simply just say nothing's going to change, in another 30 years, the top 1% will control 35% of income, and the bottom 50% of Americans will share 6. That's not a great circumstance for anybody. I mean, you know, that's bad. And so we all, I think, unless except the sociopaths who don't give a rip about anybody else but the future, we all have a huge stake in finding a way to balance capitalism out in a way that makes it work for everyone long term, not just a few of us here in the next few years. So it's an incredibly consequential argument about where prosperity comes from in capitalist societies. And the answer is, the headline is that a thriving middle class isn't the consequence of growth and prosperity. A thriving middle class is the source of growth and prosperity in capitalist economies, which is why investments in the middle class work and tax cuts for the rich don't. That's it. So does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You mentioned giving the keynote at the mayor's symposium on economic inequality, and for those of you that are interested, if you go to Crosscut, the local Seattle online publication, there's a transcript of Nick's keynote that they posted this morning. That's excellent. I highly recommend that you take a look at that.
Or let me shill for one of my companies, Lively. Have you guys heard of Lively?
Yes.
Lively's awesome. So if you download the Lively app, they went and filmed the economic, or half of it anyway, the economic inequality thing, and so you can see video of these speeches, including mine. Anyway, so cool.
Always a capitalist.
Yeah.
But so when you're giving a speech like that, when you're giving your TED Talk, you're a frequent contributor to MSNBC. You just described 2 scenarios. One that's more short-term about your need to create customers, and that is an economic engine that's good for everyone. But then there is this bigger picture, long-term consequence of heading down the same path we're on now. So how do you balance, how do you approach getting people to think long-term versus selling the short-term benefit of these economic changes?
Well,
it's hard to understand both, to really get your arms around what is a pretty fundamental shift that you're describing.
Totally fundamental shift in how we understand how economies work. I mean, it is really a radical departure from orthodox economics. And although it's not like, of course, usually, maybe you disagree, but usually when people start to think, okay, if it was like an ecosystem, would that make sense? And they're all like, well, yeah, of course it would. Like, it's totally obvious, right? If workers don't have any money, who's going to buy the stuff, right? Like, look, Walmart makes $27 billion a year. They employ 1.4 million people. 1 million of those people are in poverty. Walmart workers are the largest single recipient of food stamps in America as a group. This makes no sense. Like, if Walmart could afford to pay each one of those million workers $10,000 more a year, all of them would go from poverty to middle class, and none of you would have to pay taxes for the food stamps that those people live on. Forget, or the Medicaid, or the rent assistance, or the fact that, all the other costs of poverty, right? This is insane. It's insane that the country's largest and most profitable company impoverishes most of its workers, and we make up the difference. And we have to get people to start to say, that's insane. Like, this is nuts that Alice Walton and Rob Walton and like 3 other people make an extra $10 billion a year, and the rest of us like pick up the garbage from it. And meantime, think about how much better it would be in all the communities these people worked in if they could afford to shop at Walmart, right? Like, they can't even afford to shop at Walmart anymore, right? Like, not to mention all the other businesses around. And so we have a long-term challenge to get people to connect dots in this more ecosystemic way where they're like, well, this is crazy. Like, why wouldn't you just have that company pay those people a living wage? Like, wouldn't that be handier for everybody? Except, okay, I admit that, you know, like Rob Walton might not be worth 80 billion, maybe he's worth 70 billion or whatever, but I think that we can all live with that personally. And I think that there is this great long-term challenge to get people to start to think in a new way. And I will tell you that when you talk to local business people about raising the minimum wage to $15, it freaks them out like crazy. And that's a great challenge. And I understand that challenge because I've run businesses and I understand these visceral concerns. But as I've said to many people, you know, like so I have a 13-year-old boy. I don't know if anybody has kids that age, but they teach you a lot about life. And so one of the things I've learned about 13-year-old boys is that 99% of them agree that homework is a costly and useless exercise and an assault on their liberties. And that's because 13-year-old boys can absolutely instantly calculate the cost of doing homework, but not the benefits, even though the benefits overwhelm the costs. And in the same way, business people can instantly calculate the cost of raising wages, right? Super easy. Like no matter, even you run a 3-person company or a 300,000 person company, man, that calculation is so easy. But the benefits of living in a society where every worker earns more, super hard to calculate. The risks of whether you can or can't raise your prices to account for the increase in costs, super hard to calculate. The benefit of not having to pay for Medicaid, food stamps, all this other stuff, impossible to calculate, right? So you've got costs and risks you absolutely understand, and a bunch of benefits out there that sound kind of good, maybe possibly, but who knows, right? So what are you going to do? You're going to hunker down, right? Like it's a very natural thing. And yet, it's fun to, actually, if you look at the history of what business people have said about every change like this, ending child labor, paying women, picket, you know, an 8-hour day, the minimum wage, overtime, work safety rules, pick it, anything. You will have 10 billion business people saying, we're all going to go bankrupt. You don't let us employ children, it's the end of capitalism, right? You don't let us pay women 10 cents on the dollar, it's the end of capitalism. You don't let us like put miners in mines and kill them and not give them any safety cap, you know, the end of mining, right? Of course, not only doesn't it ever happen, but because they misunderstand capitalism, because when workers do better, actually everybody does better, it always gets better, right? But you have this dynamic of people like not being able to weigh the risks and the benefits. And so this is a huge challenge. And I don't know what to do.
Yes. Well, so given the complexity of the issue, the next natural point as a country where we will have the opportunity to have a debate like this is the 2016 election, where, as I mentioned before, you are a sought-after advisor by many that are at least rumored to be running for president. What?
Some, not all.
Some. Your some is more than are calling me, so it's, you know.
It's true.
So, what do you expect the discourse to be like?
Well, I don't know what it's going to be like, but I can tell you what I want it to be like. What I want the 2016 cycle to be is a choice between trickle-down and middle-out economics. And so, by the way, that framework of understanding the connection between how good workers do and how good businesses do we basically call middle-out economics. And we've packaged this set of ideas. Really, it's an alternative explanation for the origins of prosperity in capitalist economies up into this framework called the middle-out framework. And so President Obama uses it now. When he talks about the economy, he's always like, prosperity doesn't trickle down from the top, it's built from the middle out. And that's really important because you have to tell people that you have another theory of action with respect to creating prosperity, right? What people who don't like trickle-down economics have been doing for 30 years is saying, oh, we hate it, without offering a competing alternative, right? Without offering another way for people to understand where prosperity can come from in a capitalist economy. And so, there's a center at the Center for American Progress dedicated to essentially trying to make this choice stark for people and giving people a way of seeing that there's different ways that you can imagine creating prosperity. Our bet is that most people will enjoy seeing themselves at the center of the economic universe, not a few rich guys like me, and that will end up, that will end up in the right place. So that's our goal. So there's this gets super wonky and boring, but I'm going to say it anyway.
Yeah.
Just so you can say you heard it here first. So the middle out strategy is actually subsumed by a larger project, which is ridiculously, arrogantly ambitious, that is about redefining capitalism itself. And you probably didn't see this, but I co-authored a piece called Capitalism Redefined that was published a few months ago. I co-authored it with the guy who runs the Institute for New Economic Thinking at Oxford University, which is sort of the locus of all the best thinking about how you understand economies in this 21st century way. And if there are any sort of physics freaks out there, like Doan Farmer and a lot of famous guys from the Santa Fe Institute are connected to it, really doing incredible things. And anyway, and our argument, my pal Eric Beinhocker and I, who, by the way, wrote the best book on economics ever in 20 years called The Origin of Wealth. Not sure if you've ever come across that, but if you're feeling wonky and want to really dive in, it's very, thick, lots of words, few pictures, but great. And our argument is that the traditional way of understanding economics is completely wrong. Most people think, for instance, that prosperity and wealth is money. And the more money you have, the more prosperous you are. And that's not true. Money is simply a medium of exchange. Prosperity in human societies is the accumulation of solutions to human problems. And the way to best understand that is to compare a prosperous society to a poor one. So in a poor society, you have very few problems solved, right? Like you're going to sleep on the floor, you're going to live in a mud hut, you're going to eat bananas, you're not going to have air conditioning, and if you get sick, you're screwed, right? Even a poor European or American has air conditioning and antibiotics and a comfy bed and potato chips and the prosperity of a society really is the sum of the solutions to problems that it has accumulated. And obviously, relative prosperity is something else, right? I may have enough money to create more access to more solutions than you do, but the prosperity of society is the sum of the solutions. So if that's true, then growth, which is, most people think is growth as you look in the newspaper and you're like, oh, GDP growth. That's not growth. Growth, because the way they measure growth there is simply the amount of money you push around a system, right? It's literally how much money we move around. Growth turns out to be the rate at which we solve problems. Because the way people experience growth is the change in their lived experience. Growth is going from aspirin to aspirin plus antibiotics. That's growth. Growth is sweltering one day in the heat and living in air conditioning the next. Growth is washing the dishes by hand to dishwasher, right? That's what growth is. It's the change in material prosperity. How, the access you have to solutions to real problems that defines growth. And the faster it is, the more growth we're having. And that explains why capitalism is the greatest social technology ever created. Because capitalism literally is an evolutionary process to solve problems. The genius of capitalism is it rewards people for solving other people's problems. That's what you do. That's what entrepreneurs do, is they find an interesting, hopefully consequential problem to solve, and they instantiate it into a business, and it creates value for other people. And so that's the genius of capitalism. And that's America's secret sauce, really, the dynamism of our markets and the diversity of our people. By the way, it turns out, of course, that your ability to solve a problem is related not to how hard you try, but how many different ways you try, which is why diversity isn't something to be tolerated. It's actually one of the most important levers to drive the rate at which we solve things. So why does this matter? Because if you think about capitalism like that, you end up in a completely different place in terms of policy. Completely different place. So for instance, if growth is GDP, then investments in education are a luxury to be afforded if we have growth. If prosperity is solutions to human problems and growth is rate, then it becomes super obvious that how well educated the people are and our investments in R&D are the things which produce growth, right? And the more of this you have, the more growth and prosperity you will get, right? It turns the policy argument completely upside down. And so, anyway, that's the really long-term play that will be happening out of Oxford University.
Well,
crazy.
I
super ambitious.
It is ambitious, and I think the country would be better off if we have just a sliver of that complexity and thoughtfulness that is debated during the 2016 election.
Right.
That's looking ahead a bit. Looking back to 2007, then candidate Obama, before he really hit his stride, was in town, and you had him over to your house and hosted a fundraiser.
Yep.
Obviously, you wouldn't have done that unless you had some optimism about the vision that he was setting forth at the time. How was his performance measured up to what you expected on that winter day in 2007?
It's so-so, but it's hard to say. I mean, it hasn't exactly been smooth sailing, right? He inherited the worst economic mess in 100 years. That's tough. He inherited an opposition. I know people in the audience will disagree, but who just lost their minds in many cases, and who have sort of augured into this very sort of retrograde, nihilistic, like let's go back to 1655 sort of view, and so that's like the polarization is very, very difficult to work through. But I think, and to be clear, President Obama and his economic advisors have adopted our rhetoric because it's extremely effective and it tests like crazy, but they are orthodox thinkers. And so they are a million miles away from being able to articulate a new vision for how the economy works to move the ball forward. President Obama is a good speaker, but what I just told you about how the economy works far more, if I may say so, far more coherent and persuasive than anything he's ever said. Yes? Yes. And that's because he's surrounded by guys who taught economics at the University of Chicago, and they're good people and they care about people and blah, 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 but they're very orthodox in their thinking, and it's hard for them to jump out. One of the great challenges, of course, is all these guys, and they are mostly guys, got their PhDs thinking in a particular way, and this new way of thinking is an obliteration of that. And people have a hard time walking away from, but I got an A, it's like, I know, but you were wrong. No, I can be wrong. I got an A, anyway, it's a tough sled. Yeah. Big, massive paradigm shifts are tough, but at the end of the day, I hope that Americans can embrace this idea that we're all better off when we're all better off. Like, seriously. That's all you need to know about economics. We're all better off when we're all better off. Poverty programs don't think of them as things we do to help the poor. Poverty programs are what drive the economy. When you convert a poor person into a middle-class customer, you have That's what makes the economy go. Look, there are 205 countries on Earth running a simultaneous experiment in how to create prosperity. Just look at it like that, 205 experiments. 15 of them are working. The other 185 are hellholes for all intents and purposes. 100% of the places that are working have huge poverty programs, right? They have high degrees of progressive taxation, activist governments, lots of regulation. That's because that's what works. There are no alternatives to that. There are no libertarian paradises where nobody pays any taxes, nobody follows any rules, and everybody lives like a king. It's not because like the libertarian smart guys haven't gotten together and tried it. It just doesn't work, right? Capitalism works in, just got to think about it ecosystemically, right? Bring up the bottom, you build a base that, the thing is secure. If you don't, everything collapses. And so, of course, you can go too far. Like $15 sounds like a leap to people. It's actually not, because it's only about half of what it would be if the minimum wage had tracked the wages of the top 1%. But $50 is too much, right? To be clear, just because you say it should go up doesn't mean the higher it goes, the better it is, right? It is all about balance. And who's to know where the balance should be, right? Like there's no perfect answer to any of that. Smart people have to get together and kind of go, it should be over here, and you experiment and try. But we're all better off when we're all better off. That is the watchword that we should all live by. And if we do, we're going to have a very, very prosperous, stable, and secure society. And if it's every man for himself, then we will be like Somalia or the Congo, which is, the political system they are presently employing there. So,
yeah. Going back to a comment you made earlier that you like being told you're awesome, but you don't really care if you're told you're not awesome.
Yeah.
You're clearly not afraid to take controversial stands.
Right.
As a result, you've been sort of described as a very polarizing figure.
Yes.
Is there any of the criticism that you get or the counter arguments that you hear that do bother you? Is there just a step too far in any case?
Well, that's a great question. There's one criticism that I'm very mindful that does genuinely worry me, and one that doesn't worry me but drives me crazy. The one that worries me is, so I've taken very public stands. I've become essentially a public figure. I get a lot of attention. I'm on TV a lot. And I didn't really seek to become quite a powerful person, but I am kind of a very powerful person today. And that is a siren call, right? It's hard to be as ambitious as I am and not just love the hell out of that. And the thing is that what I try to be mindful of is that if you use power to make other people's lives better, it's righteous. But power for power's sake, publicity for publicity's sake, that's evil. That's not righteous. That's something that I don't want to be. And it is very difficult for somebody as ambitious as me to manage that very fine line. And I stepped over it a couple of weeks ago. I'm not sure. The Seattle Times did this ridiculous profile on me, which took the entire front page of the Sunday paper. It was a nutty. I had no idea they were going to. I knew the profile was going to happen, but I didn't know it was going to be like that. But
I saw it, and I was glad we had booked you beforehand. I figured your schedule would be too packed
crazy,
after that.
Right? But anyway, I'll give you this one example. Is that I was in a meeting with one of the reporter doing it, and a United States senator, who I had met with earlier in the week and had been talking about these things, called me and left me a voicemail. She had just been to the White House, and she was like, "Oh my God, they're just saying all these things about your stuff, and it's so awesome, and you're so awesome and so influential, and wow, you're so cool," right? Something like that. It was very flattering, and I played it for the reporter. Why did I do that? Because it made me feel good, right? The problem is he wrote about it, and it made her look like an idiot. And the thing is, I didn't need to play it. It was egotistical. It was an egotistical. It was a thing I did to advance me, not the cause. And and then I spoke in the Senate 2 weeks ago to the steering committee, which is a very big deal. And she was there, and she in the nicest, in the most elegant and stylish way, read me the riot act over this. And the thing is it was inexcusable. It was just incredibly stupid and inexcusable that I did that. And that is something I'm really sensitive to. Like, I don't want to be that guy. Like, power to improve the lives of other people in the country, awesome. Just to be, like, see yourself in the paper, not. Yeah. So that's something I'm really, like, I'm trying to watch. And my wife is watching it even more than me, I will tell you.
Is there any?
But the thing that drives me crazy is everywhere I go, there's always somebody who raises their hand and says, well, if you feel so strongly about the minimum wage, why don't you pay it? Or if you feel so strongly about higher taxes, why don't you just pay them? Why leave the rest of us alone? And this criticism I find just extraordinarily annoying, because I find it extraordinarily stupid. Because here's the thing: is that that's not the way the world works. I guarantee you that if at the next company meeting you were to say, Jeff, if you all feel strongly about the success of the company, you go ahead and work real hard, but it's a free country, I'm taking the day off, you're out, right? There is a reason that children have parents, and teams have coaches, and companies have CEOs, and armies have generals, and countries have leaders and governments, because you cannot run a railroad without compelling people to do the right thing. Some people will always do the right thing. Some people sometimes do the right thing. In any large group of people, there will be a bunch of people who do not do the right thing. We have speed limits and stop signs in our transportation system, and that's what makes it effective, right? These signs are not examples. They're not suggestions. Right? They are rules with consequences, like prison. That's because some people out there actually don't give a shit about you and will drive right through the stop sign, assuming that you will, or will drive 100 miles an hour while you're going 60, because why wouldn't they, right? Capitalism is no different. And so the thing about the minimum wage is, yeah, I could pay 15 and you could pay 10, except then I don't compete on the same basis as you do, and you gain advantage. And more to the point, my employees can afford to buy your stuff, but your employees can't afford to buy my stuff. And my employees can afford to pay taxes, but your employees need food stamps, right? So, like, what you have to bring everybody, that's the thing about these systems, is that they work super well when everybody's on the same page, and they don't work at all when some people do it and some people don't. And so this whole attack of, like, well, if you feel so strongly, why don't you, it's just like idiotic. It's just, yeah. It's so weak. And yet in every crowd, maybe not here, you have some guy stand up and, say that. So that's the one that.
Yeah. Given your power and influence, any pull to run for public office yourself?
No. My wife and I have endeavored to live a life that would not hold up under that kind of scrutiny. Like,
that's probably, I would say that's wonderful self-awareness.
Yeah, we just don't lead a life that, like, we have a great life, and I just don't want to pretend like we're not doing our stuff and ripping around in our
the man
plane
of the people shtick wouldn't
work. Yeah,
work.
no, I am not a man of the people. I'm not a man of the people. So anyway.
Good. Questions from the audience? That's just for the recording, Salim. So.
Okay. Yeah. I can hear you.
So the question is, I love the new way of looking at capitalism in general. And obviously most of us being in Seattle and very labor-minded actually agree with my view. If middle class grows, the economy grows, right?
Yeah. Well, business gets better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think historically in the last 4 or 5 years, what we have seen is this lack of champion, a public figure who can get out there and eloquently talk about this, at the same time hold a public office to make this change. So my question is, who do you see from the new breed of political leaders who would be that champion in time to come that you think are progressive enough? And secondly, if you don't see one of those people out there right now, then what's going to happen? Is it another we are the 99% movement which just failed because of lack of the leadership? In my opinion, what's it?
So that's a very good question. So one of the reasons that I've been effective is that there are very few people in America who have run as many businesses as successfully as me. And you know, like I've done 30 different businesses, banks, you know, textile manufacturing, high tech, you know, drones, you pick it, I've done it. And so you know, the thing is that I have a moral authority to make these strong, you know, arguments about how capitalism works that few people have. The problem with President Obama is that he's a very smart guy, but he never run a lemonade stand. So even if he read my speech, it's hard for him to advance these ideas as aggressively as somebody like me can, right? Because I can take on anybody, right? You know, pick your pundit, business guy, I can eviscerate them. Because I've done, like, I just know all these guys, right? They've never done anything. And the problem is that there aren't people running, really, who have my perspective and my experience, right? Like Hillary Clinton. And, you know, they're all kind of wonky lawyers and stuff like that. And so there are very few people in the country that are advancing these ideas. I mean, we're working really hard to find more people who will get on board. But, you know, I'll tell you, I had dinner 3 nights ago with Reed Hastings, who runs Netflix, who's an extraordinarily talented guy, incredibly bright, definitely one of the most successful business people in all of the country. And his heart is exactly where mine is. But the guy is completely augured in on that old-timey microeconomics, right? Like, he learned it in college. He's galactically smart, and so his brain loves it, right? That's the thing about that stuff, right? Is if you're really mathy, that old-time microeconomics is so awesome because everything's a price and everything's an equation. If this goes up, that goes down, and, you know, like, I can do the math in my head, and you can't. And the thing is that people confuse being good at something with being good at a thing with the thing being useful or true, right? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's really easy to get seduced by, oh, I'm so good at this, and not remember that maybe this doesn't matter, right? And so even a guy as wonderful as Reed is, who's done so much in so many ways across a range of issues, it's hard for me to get. It was striking because it's hard for me. Like, he agrees, but he would use a different, it's hard for him, like on the minimum wage, he disagreed that we should bring the bottom up. His idea was we should tax rich people more, I agree, and then use that money to pay companies to subsidize workers. And I'm like, that's why? Because his idea is because you want to incentivize the right behavior, which comes all the way back down, all the way back to this crazy old-timey microeconomics. This idea that if this goes up, that must go down, that it's all about incentives. And it's just not. That's just not true. Like this idea, you know, like Speaker Boehner saying the other day, you know, if you raise the price of employment, guess what happens? You get less of it, right? This idea that but CEO pays up 100, you know, like 1,000% over the last 30 years, right? CEOs used to make 30 times median wage, now they make 300 to 500. So if the price of employment went up, then how is it that we have more CEOs than ever before? We didn't like outsource any of those jobs, did we? Right? You know, like,
careful now.
Okay, yeah. But, you know, tech workers make multiples of the median worker. We got more than ever, right? Like, you know, clearly this is not true, but these ideas are deeply baked into people's heads, even the best people, the people with whose hearts and intuitions are on the right side. And so there is this very hard problem of getting people to flip, to be like, oh my God, I was looking at it wrong. We got to go another way. So I used a lot of words to say I have no idea. But part of the reason I've been so public is because no one is doing it. So there's this vacuum.
Hey, Nick, so we have like 10 people that want to ask questions, so you got to go quick.
Okay.
So I've got one first. You talk about all these macro systems and for the country and for all that. What kind of systems do you employ for your world? Because you're involved in politics, you're involved in running businesses and venture capital. What are the systems you employ?
You mean in terms of managing people and
time? How you juggle all of these things you're doing?
So I juggle a lot. I juggle, like everybody's different, and probably I would have been diagnosed ADD as a kid. You know, like I just need a lot of stimulation. I need a lot of stimulation, and so one thing is very, very hard for me. It's always been hard for me. I was a crappy student. You know, it's hard for me to concentrate on one thing for a long time. And if you're like that kid that just doesn't care whether they get an A or a C, you know, you're just not going to be the star student. And so I juggle a lot because my brain wants to juggle a lot. But I have very deliberately carved my time up to include no more than about a third devoted to things associated with increasing my net worth. So, I was very fortunate. I got very wealthy very young, and I just decided that I didn't want to spend the rest of my life just trying to pile up the money. Because I have a huge pile, and, like it would be awesome to have 10 times as much. Don't get me wrong, because believe me, you think I make trouble now, boy, I could really even make more. That would be awesome. But like how many super rich guys do you know that have, like, that's all they've ever done, right? Like all they do is try to make more money. And they, like, I want to run the business. This is bullshit. They just want to make more money. I just think it's hollow to me, empty. And so 2/3 of my time now goes to policy, politics, philanthropy, public service, various projects and stuff like that. Does that answer your question? Yeah. So.
Yeah, thank you for being here. This is really inspiring and educational. And I guess my question is, you outlined a way to reform the economy through economic policy. Do you see any opportunity to help with education reform? Are you involved in that? Is there, talk about some poverty programs, is there a way that we can empower more knowledge about personal finance and make that more accessible to help people learn how to manage their own purse better so that they can be better customers of our economy?
Well, there are two questions. So the first is public education reform, and in terms of civic energy, that's where most of my energy has gone historically. I co-founded the League of Education Voters, and I've been involved in basically every public ed fight for 20 years.
It's fair to say you've given more toward that cause than anybody else in the state.
Except Bill Gates.
Except for Bill Gates.
Yeah, pretty much. Every single fight in the legislature, every single initiative, we basically been at the tip of the spear. And so we've been focused on funding issues because more money does help. And we've been focused on reform issues because running the thing better will help too. So we're, of a big changed. I used to be against charter schools, and now I'm for charter schools. And so we passed the charter school thing last year. And there's all sorts of other things that are going on that we hope can make public ed, the institution of public education, work better. It's a tough problem because giant institutions are very difficult to make work well, whether it's the public education system or whether it's Microsoft. for instance, right? Which is about as screwed up as the public education system, right? Like really, it's about the same. And that's just in the nature of these giant systems that have gotten good at one thing, and then the world changed, and they couldn't adapt. Again, coming back to the ecosystemic and evolutionary metaphor, right? The thing that defines success is your ability to adapt to changing circumstances. Big institutions have trouble. And so we're working really hard on a range of things. I think that your question about financial literacy is interesting. And the first nonprofit I ever helped with was, believe it or not, something called Economics America, which was this little nonprofit that tried to teach teachers how to teach kids how for instance, that when stores bought something, they marked it up. Like most people don't know that, like like these really basic facts about how the economy works. And I did it for a bunch of years, and there's other possibilities of doing that. So.
Next question.
So I got kind of the outside the box thinking idea just from listening. You talked a lot about the unorthodox and the nonconformist, and you kind of reminded me of like a Richard Dawkins, Lawrence Krauss kind of person, which is a good thing because I really enjoy listening to those guys. But it kind of seems to me, and this is a comment / question, that the idea of being an outspoken voice, but kind of a consultant towards policy being the way to fix a lot of this stuff seems orthodox and conformist. And so this isn't a judgment, but my curiosity is that, like, when you're sleeping at night or when you're laying in bed at night, do you have ideas that are kind of more unorthodox and nonconformist to change a lot of these problems?
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
That's a great question. Is how do you change the system? And because it's a huge, nasty system, and I think a lot about that, I think you pose exactly the right question, which is how do you break the system? Do you work within it? It's a little. I think it's a little of both. And what we try to do is be opportunistic. When a person who's running for president calls you up and says, "What should I say?" You talk to them, right? Why wouldn't you? When there's an opportunity to change the frame of the debate around the minimum wage, you do. So you may recall that a year ago there was no talk of raising the minimum wage anyplace, and now you can open a newspaper in America and not have a story about, well, maybe we should raise the minimum wage. We did that. That $15 number, I picked, right? We changed the frame of the debate around the minimum wage by changing it from a social justice fight, which was, oh, the poor people, maybe we should give them 50 cents more an hour and it'll make ourselves feel better, to, no, if they made a living wage, everything would get better. That was the frame, that broke that whole paradigm. So let me tell you, so crazy, right? So a year and a half ago, we decided on this strategy, and I started calling the people who have been working on the minimum wage for 30 years. And I'm like, so what would happen if you raised it to $15? They're like, I have no idea. Like, well, how much more money would working people have if you did that? No idea. How much less food stamps would they need if you did that? No idea. How much more taxes would this group of people pay if they made a minimum wage? No idea. Like, no one had ever thought about anything but 50 cents an hour. Ever. In 30 years. It's the damnedest thing I've ever seen. Right? Because they completely think about it as a social justice thing. They don't think about the economy ecosystemically. That never occurred to them. The only thing that ever occurred to these people was, we should raise the minimum wage because to not do it would be mean. Mean. Like, seriously, that's as far as their thinking went. It never occurred to them that if we raised the minimum wage, it would be good for everybody. It would generate growth. It would be good for business. Like, It's literally $450 billion extra. Well, you know, payroll taxes are 15%. You know, that's like $60 billion extra in tax that's going in, you know, like Social Security crisis? Not anymore. You know where the Social Security crisis comes from, right? The problem of these entitlements is that people like me have all the money, right? And we're not taxed. My $30 million annual in income, like I'm only taxed, was it the first $106,000, right? Payroll taxes go up to $106,000.
You made that much sitting here talking to me.
No, exactly. No, but just think about the math, right? Think about how the taxes work, right? Is if you're only taxing poor people for these things, and then you take all the money away from everybody and put it over here and don't tax any of it, well, guess what happens to the programs? You have no tax base anymore. When you take that money and you spread it over people, well, the programs have no problem anymore, right? But the people who care about the minimum wage had never even considered these ideas. And so it's unbelievably disruptive to go to them with a completely frame-changing way of conceptualizing the problem and the solution, and bang, there in 30 municipalities, people are talking about raising the minimum wage from 0 in 1 year. Hell yes, it works. Hell yes, it works.
Let's have one more question, and then we'll let Nick go.
Thank you. I think that one of the fundamental challenges of our economy right now is that the sort of central imperative, like maximize profit for shareholders, is directly at odds with all the things you're talking about.
It is.
Especially when it comes to services that aren't about making money, but that are about doing good things for people.
Solving problems.
So like hospitals, right? The way a hospital maximizes profit is spend less, give out less care, and take in more money. Is there a economic model that can work and still be capitalism and be about stability, sustainability? You know, like, can we tell companies that, you know what, you don't need to grow more every year. You can just grow at the same rate every year. You can do it 20% every year, and that's it. And you know, the problem solves itself. I mean,
yeah. So I think that's one of the central challenges for humanity. And I think if you redefine what prosperity is from money to solutions to human problems, and growth as not creating more heat, but rate, all of this falls into place, right? Because all of a sudden, you can see that there's a difference in the economy between curing cancer and creating it, right? Like we live in an economy where people are literally taught in business schools that it is the same to go to work for Philip Morris and create cancer and going to work for some biotechnology company and cure it. That if these two enterprises are the same size, that they are equivalent in our economy. Right? This is crazy. So just think about GDP for a minute. Like if I go out on this street and I break the windows out of every car on Fifth Avenue here, that's good for GDP. Yay, growth. Seriously. The diabetes that you get from eating all the food in the center of the grocery store, great for growth, right? Great for growth, right? Think of all the money that has to change hands when people get diabetes, right? It's insane. If you redefine economic activity as the problem you solve, you create a massive cultural and economic shift. As people start to say, there actually is a difference between curing cancer and creating it. And I think we should do that, and I think we should find ways to incentivize that behavior, right? Let's do things that actually solve problems, make the world better, and let's discourage things that make it worse. And let's not be fooled that just because you can enrich yourself doing something, it's good, right? And that's why capitalism, redefining capitalism, this thing that I was talking about, is so crucial.
So it's not capitalism inherently.
No, it's the way we've defined what it is and the way we measure it. all capitalism is an evolutionary system that enables and rewards people for solving other people's problems. The Achilles heel of it, of course, is that you can enrich yourself by creating more problems than you solve. And that's what we have to avoid. So, make sense?
Absolutely. Well, Nick, we started this interview series with the intent of giving the company a chance to step out of the day-to-day and to think differently and creatively about issues. And I can't think of anybody better to have challenged us to do just that. So thank you for coming.
Is he not good at this? He's like, he should be Charlie Rose.